The Aurora Lounge did not look like a place where ordinary people went to think. Its ceilings were high and coffered, its walls dark walnut, its windows overlooking Michigan Avenue dressed in ivory linen that was changed every Tuesday. The coffee cost $14 a cup and arrived on handmade ceramic saucers that were imported from a studio in Vermont. The clientele came not just for the coffee, but for what the coffee represented: a membership, unspoken and absolute, in the upper tier of Chicago life. Daniel Brooks had worked here for 6 years and understood this perfectly. He was not part of that membership. He was part of the architecture. The way the pendant lights or the espresso machine were part of it necessary. Background, unacknowledged. He was 39 years old. He had kind eyes and a jaw that had gone a little angular with years of not sleeping quite enough. His hands were steady. His movements in the dining room had the quality of water finding its level effortless, unhurried, and almost invisible. He could carry 4 cups on a tray without making a sound. Before each shift began, he sat in the narrow staff room behind the kitchen and took his phone from his locker. He did this every time, without exception. He held the phone the way some men hold a rosary. On the screen was a photograph. A small girl of 8, gap-toothed and laughing, wearing a paper crown she had made herself, her blonde hair wild around her face. Sophie. He touched the edge of the screen, not the image exactly, just the glass near it, the way you might press your palm to a window to feel the warmth of the sun on the other side. Then he locked the phone, slid it into his pocket, and went to work. Sophie lived with him in a 2-bedroom apartment in Pilsen, 20 minutes south by train. She was in 3rd grade. She liked chapter books about horses and disliked math, except when it involved money, because she had decided at age 6 that she would one day open a bakery and needed to understand profit margins. She had told Daniel this over cereal one morning with complete seriousness, and he had written it down in a small notebook he kept in his bedside table. He wrote a lot of things down. The notebook was almost full. Her mother, Claire, had died 3 years ago. Ovarian cancer, stage 4, discovered too late. The bills from the hospital had taken 18 months to fully understand and were still not fully paid. Daniel made $63,000 a year at the Aurora Lounge, including tips. Chicago was not a city that rewarded $63,000 generously. He had done the math many times. He did not talk about Claire at work. He did not talk about Sophie at work. He did not talk about the nights when Sophie had a bad dream and woke calling for her mother. And he sat on the edge of her bed with his back very straight, his voice very even, and read to her from the horse books until she drifted back to sleep. Those things were his. They were not for the Aurora Lounge. What he brought to the Aurora Lounge was precision, professionalism, and a quality that his manager, Richard Holt, called, in his better moods, presence. Richard was a trim, nervous man of 50 who had managed the dining room for 11 years and knew exactly what the place was worth to its regulars. He also knew what each regular was worth to the place. He kept a private spreadsheet. Daniel knew how to read a room. He could tell within 30 seconds of a guest being seated whether they wanted conversation or silence, efficiency or ceremony. He adapted without thinking, the way a good musician adapts to the acoustics of a new hall. 6 years of this had made him very good. It had also made him very tired in ways that had nothing to do with the hours. He was refilling the corner credenza with fresh linen napkins folded into fans, the way Richard preferred when the door opened and the room changed. He did not look up right away. He rarely did. But he felt it, the way you feel a change in air pressure before a storm. Alexandra Pierce walked into a room the way weather moved into a valley, without announcement, without apology, and without any particular interest in how the valley felt about it. She was 35. Her hair was dark and pulled back in a way that managed to look both effortless and extremely deliberate. Her suit was charcoal, cut close, the jacket open at the collar. She wore no jewelry except for a single watch on her left wrist, a piece of Swiss engineering worth more than Daniel's car. She did not carry a handbag. She carried a phone in one hand and the quiet authority of a woman who had never in her professional life been told to wait. Alexandra Pierce was the president and sole controlling shareholder of Pierce Capital Group, a real estate investment company that held interests in 11 commercial properties in Chicago's Loop and River North districts. She had inherited the firm at 28 when her father died of a stroke and then, over the following 7 years, had tripled its portfolio through a combination of aggressive acquisition, meticulous financial modeling, and a negotiating style that experienced Chicago attorneys privately described as surgical. She was not known for warmth. She was known for being right. She had a usual table, the corner window booth with its view of Michigan Avenue. She had sat there every Tuesday and Thursday morning for 4 years. She ordered the same thing: a double espresso, a glass of still water at room temperature, and a small plate of smoked salmon on rye. The order never varied. The Aurora Lounge knew this. The kitchen knew this. The espresso machine practically knew this. She settled into the booth without looking at the menu. She opened her phone. The muscles in her jaw were set in a way that suggested the morning had already presented her with something that required managing. Daniel crossed the room to her table. He set down the water, first room temperature, no ice, no lemon, then laid the menu he knew she wouldn't open and said quietly, "Good morning." The usual? She did not look up. He turned to go, and then, for just a moment so brief he almost doubted it, he saw her eyes move. Not to him. To the far side of the room, where old Marcus, the Aurora's longest-serving staff member, was wiping down a table with careful, methodical strokes, the way a man wipes down a table when the motion itself is a form of rest. Marcus was 64 and had worked the lunch shift here for 19 years. He was unhurried. He was thorough. There was something in him that Daniel had always found quietly dignified. Something crossed Alexandra Pierce's face. Not softness, exactly. More like the memory of softness, the way a scar holds the shape of the wound that made it. It lasted less than a second. Then her phone rang and she answered it. And the expression was gone, and she was back to being the queen of Chicago. The trouble started simply, the way most serious trouble does. Daniel brought the espresso at 7 minutes past 9. He set it down without a word, the saucer placed precisely, the cup oriented so the handle faced right. Alexandra Pierce lifted it, took a sip, and set it down. "This is not hot enough." Daniel took the cup. He brought it back to the bar. The espresso was, by any objective measure, correctly prepared, and at the proper serving temperature, but he remade it fresh shot, pre-warmed cup, the saucer run under hot water and dried, and brought it back without comment. She took a sip, set it down, did not acknowledge the adjustment. He thought that was the end of it. At 9:20, she called him back to the table. "This saucer." She pushed it an inch toward him with one finger. "There's a mark on it." He examined the saucer. There was a faint ring on the glaze, not dirt, but a small imperfection in the ceramic itself, something from manufacture. He replaced the saucer. He brought fresh linen. He did not sigh. At 9:35, she said, "You're standing too close when you pour." He adjusted his angle. He recalibrated the distance he stood from the table edge. He continued. Inside, he was very still. He had learned to be still in this way during Claire's illness, in hospital waiting rooms, and in conversations with insurance administrators who delivered bad news in the language of policy clauses. Stillness was not the same as acceptance. Stillness was a form of discipline, a way of keeping the hands available for the next thing that needed doing. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He did not look at it during service. Richard had a rule about phones, and Daniel agreed with the rule. But when he stepped through the service door for a moment to relay an order to the kitchen, he glanced at the screen. It was Sophie. "Daddy, I got a perfect score on my spelling test. Are you proud of me?" The message had a small red star emoji at the end. She always used the red star. She said it was better than gold because nobody expected it. Daniel stood in the kitchen doorway for exactly 3 seconds. He looked at the message. He put the phone back in his pocket. He squared his shoulders and went back into the dining room. He was proud of her. He was always proud of her. She had no idea how much. At 10 minutes past 10, Alexandra Pierce's phone rang. She answered it at the table, which was not unusual here. The Aurora Lounge catered to people whose business did not pause for meals. Daniel was 2 tables away, quietly clearing a setting. He was not listening, but in a room that quiet, sound carried. He could tell from her voice that the call was going badly. The intervals between her words grew shorter. Her posture, already formal, went rigid. Someone on the other end was telling her something she had not expected, and she did not like unexpected things. She ended the call without a farewell. Daniel sensed, in the particular way you sense oncoming weather, that he should not be the next person to approach her table. He busied himself at the credenza, straightening things that did not need straightening. He gave her 2 minutes. Then she raised her hand. He went to her. "I asked for the salmon at 9:15, she said. Her voice was controlled, but only just the way a river is controlled by a dam that is taking on more than it was designed to hold. "It's coming, Miss Pierce. I'll check on the timing. It should be here." Her eyes lifted to his for the first time all morning. They were dark and sharp and very tired behind whatever composure she was maintaining. "I've been sitting here for over an hour, and I have a meeting in 40 minutes, and this." She gestured at the empty spot on the table where the plate should have been. "This is not acceptable. I understand. Don't tell me you understand. Just fix it." Her voice had gone up by 1 register. Not a shout. Not yet, but the people at the nearest table, a young couple with matching laptops and matching frowns, had both looked over. The man at the small table by the window, who had been reading the same page of his book for several minutes, was no longer pretending. Daniel went to the kitchen. The salmon was 40 seconds from being plated. He brought it out himself rather than waiting for the runner. Set it down at the table with smooth efficiency. "Thank you," Alexandra said, her voice now at normal volume. But then she picked up her fork, turned the plate, and said quietly, but very clearly, "This is cold." It was not cold. He knew it was not cold. He had carried it directly from the kitchen. He said nothing. He lifted the plate. "You know," she said, to the plate being removed, to the middle distance, to no one in particular, "I genuinely wonder sometimes what it is that makes certain people believe they're suited for positions they so obviously cannot handle." He stopped. He turned back slowly. She had her phone in her hand again. She was not looking at him. "That's why you're still carrying trays at your age," she said. The room went very quiet. Not the cultivated, elegant quiet of the Aurora Lounge. A different kind. The held-breath quiet of people who have just witnessed something they cannot unwitness. The young couple with laptops had stopped typing. The man with the book had set it down. Old Marcus, across the room, had stopped moving his cloth. Richard Holt appeared at Daniel's elbow in the way that managers appear when something is about to become a problem, not because they have noticed it, but because the room has told them. "Daniel." His voice was low. A word. He steered Daniel toward the service corridor. His face was the face of a man doing arithmetic. "She spends approximately $4,000 a month in this establishment," he said. "Her firm has recommended us to 9 other clients in the past 2 years. I need you to apologize." Daniel looked at him for a moment. "She said that because of a business call that went badly. She said it because she was embarrassed and I was standing there and I was easy." "Daniel, she said it because nobody told her she couldn't." "The apology," Richard said, each word precise, "needs to happen in the next 60 seconds, or I have to ask you to end your shift." Daniel looked back through the service window into the dining room. He could see the back of her head, the dark hair, the straight line of her neck. He could see the couple by the window, both of whom were watching the service door. He thought about Sophie's message. The red star. He said, "Give me a minute." He walked back to her table. She did not look up from her phone. He stood at the edge of the table, not close, not far. He waited until she looked up, because he needed her to be looking at him when he said it. He gave her 5 seconds, which was long enough that the room noticed he was waiting, and she noticed the room noticing. She looked up. He said, in a voice that was very level and very clear, not loud, just clear, the way a properly tuned instrument is clear, I will serve you professionally. That's my job, and I do it well. But I will not accept being humiliated. Not today, not any day. A pause. One full breath. Shout at me again, and this ends. The Aurora Lounge held its silence for what felt much longer than it was. Alexandra Pierce did not move. She held his gaze the way a person holds something they are trying to understand and finding more difficult than they expected. He did not fill the silence. He did not soften it or walk it back or drop his eyes. He simply stood there and let the words be what they were. Richard came through the service door 18 seconds later. His face had gone past arithmetic into something more desperate. He positioned himself between Daniel and the room, his back to the tables, his voice dropped so low it was nearly inaudible. 30 seconds, he said. You apologize in 30 seconds, or I have to let you go. Daniel said nothing. Daniel, your job. Richard gestured vaguely, the gesture of a man who wanted to invoke everything without saying any of it. You know what's at stake. He did know. He knew that he needed this job the way a climber needs the rope, not as a choice, but as a condition of survival. He knew what the rent was on the Pilsen apartment, which had gone up twice in 3 years. He knew what Sophie's school supplies cost and what the after-school program cost. And he knew what Dr. Kaplan, the pediatric dentist in Wicker Park, who Sophie liked because she explained every instrument before she used it, charged for the appointment Sophie needed next month. He knew what remained on the hospital debt from Claire's last 4 months, a number he kept on a sticky note inside the kitchen cabinet where the Muggs lived, because he had found that keeping it visible made it less terrifying than when he let himself forget it existed. The number on the sticky note was $18,420. He thought about the morning. The remade espresso, the replaced saucer, the adjusted angle. He thought about carrying the salmon directly from the kitchen and being told it was cold. He thought about, that's why you're still carrying trays at your age. He thought about Sophie's text. The red star. He thought about Sophie on the edge of her bed at 2 a.m, calling for Claire, and him sitting with his back very straight, reading about horses in a quiet, even voice. He thought about all the things he had swallowed in 6 years of standing still in rooms where people talked about money the way he talked about Sophie. Like it was the organizing principle of all existence, like it was the measure of whether a person's days had meant anything. 15 seconds, Richard said. Daniel looked at him. He felt something in his chest, not anger, not self-righteousness, but something older and more fundamental. A kind of arithmetic that had nothing to do with rent or debt and everything to do with a small girl's red star and the question of what he wanted her to understand, someday, about what a person was worth. No, he said. Richard closed his eyes for 1 second. When he opened them, they were full of a complicated grief. Daniel. No, he did not slam anything. He did not make a speech. He went to the service corridor, where his apron hung on the hook that had been his for 6 years. He untied it, a simple white cotton apron, creased along the waistband from the fold he made the same way every morning. He folded it as he always folded it, in thirds lengthwise, then in half, so it made a neat rectangle. He did this slowly, with attention, the way he did most things. He walked back through the dining room. Not the service door. The front of the house. He passed Marcus, who watched him with an expression that was very still and very knowing. He passed the young couple, who had both closed their laptops. He passed the man with the book. He stopped at Alexandra Pierce's table one last time. She was watching him. Something in her face had shifted since the 30 seconds. It was subtle, barely visible, but it was there. a tightness around the eyes that was not anger. He set the folded apron down on the edge of the table. He did not drop it. He did not throw it. He set it down with the same precision he used for saucers. "I warned you," he said. Then he turned and he walked to the door, and he pushed it open, and the cold November air off Michigan Avenue came in all at once and hit him in the face like something true. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment. His hands were at his sides. His breathing was even. He thought about Claire. Suddenly, not her illness, but her before it. The way she laughed at things other people thought were too small to be funny, the way she'd made coffee on Sunday mornings and stood at the kitchen window and talked to him about everything and nothing. He thought about the last time she'd seen Sophie laugh. He thought about how she would have looked at him right now, from the kitchen window. What her face would have said. He thought she would have said, "Yes, that." He walked to the train. Inside the Aurora Lounge, for approximately 45 seconds after the door closed, no one spoke. Then, the young woman with the laptop, her name was Bridget Calloway, and she was a junior associate at an architectural firm in the West Loop, and she had been coming to the Aurora for 3 months because her mentor said it was where deals were made. Leaned back in her chair and said, very quietly, to no one in particular, "Good for him." Her companion, a man named Trevor with round glasses and the look of someone who chose his words carefully, said nothing. But he closed his laptop with a soft click. A woman near the window, her name was Helen, early 60s, silver hair and a low bun, who came here on Tuesday mornings to read the art section in peace, looked across the room at the empty place where Daniel had stood. Her expression was not triumphant or entertained. It was something more like recognition. The man with the book, whose name was Philip, and who had been a federal district court judge for 22 years, and who was now retired, and had come here for quiet and found something else, set the book down on the table. With deliberate care, he looked toward the window table, where Alexandra Pierce sat motionless among the remains of a breakfast she had barely touched. He said, and said it neither loudly nor quietly, but at exactly the volume a person uses when they are not performing but cannot stay silent. The truly wealthy never need to raise their voice. It was the kind of sentence that required no follow-up. Marcus, across the room, resumed wiping down his table. His cloth moved in the same methodical circles, but he was watching Alexandra Pierce the way a very experienced person watches something that is about to change. Richard Holt stood in the service doorway and did the arithmetic that managers do when a situation has escaped all the categories they were given to contain it. He had a spreadsheet that showed what Alexandra Pierce was worth to the Aurora Lounge per quarter. He had no equivalent spreadsheet for what Daniel Brooks was worth. He had never been asked to make one. He suspected, in the way that one suspects things one does not yet know how to face, that this was a significant gap in his accounting. Alexandra Pierce had not moved. Her phone was face down on the table, which was unusual. She was looking at the folded apron. It was a simple piece of cotton. It had been folded precisely thirds lengthwise, then in half. Exactly the way a person folds something when they are trying to leave it better than they found it. The room waited. She did not speak, and the room waited, and the November light came through the ivory linen curtains and lay across the walnut paneling in quiet strips, and the espresso machine was silent because no one had ordered anything. She had been 17 when her mother came home from the Hargreave house in Winnetka with a wet mark on her left cheek. Her mother's name was Frances Pierce, before she married. Frances Donnelly, before that. She was a small woman who had cleaned houses in the northern suburbs of Chicago for 20 years, beginning when Alexandra was 3 and ending when Alexandra's father's small insurance business finally turned a profit and they could afford for her to stop. She had cleaned the Hargreave house every Thursday for 11 of those 20 years. The mark on her cheek was not a bruise. It was a flush, the kind that follows humiliation in a body that reacts by burning. Frances had told Alexandra what happened plainly, the way she told most things. "Mrs. Hargreave had been entertaining that afternoon and was embarrassed to have the cleaning woman visible to her guests, and had raised her voice in the kitchen in a way that carried, and the guests had heard, and Frances had continued working because she needed the Thursday income, and Mrs. Hargreave knew this. Alexandra had been 17, and she had stood in the kitchen of their house in Portage Park, a small kitchen with yellow curtains that Frances kept very clean, and she had felt something close inside her, like a fist. "Don't ever," she had begun. Alexandra. Her mother only used the full version of the name when she wanted to be taken seriously. "This is what work sometimes is. You learn to carry it and leave it at the door. I won't ever let anyone do that to me." Her mother had looked at her for a long moment. "No," she'd said, finally. "I don't think you will." She hadn't. She had built a version of herself that no one could speak to the way Mrs. Hargreave had spoken to Frances Donnelly in the kitchen in Winnetka. She had made herself powerful enough that the only voice in the room was her own. She had been very careful, for 17 years, to maintain this. She had not considered, until this particular Tuesday morning in November, what that process had cost. She looked at the folded apron. She thought about the man who had carried it the way he had folded it slowly, with attention, and set it down not as a statement but as a conclusion. She thought about the tone of his voice, which had not been angry. She had heard a great deal of anger in her professional life, and that was not what it had been. His voice had been the voice of a person describing a fact. She thought about her mother's kitchen, the yellow curtains, the flush on Frances's cheek. She thought about all the people who had cleaned her apartment in Lincoln Park, brought her car around, changed the sheets in her guest room, poured her coffee at $14 a cup. She thought about whether she had ever learned their names. She thought about the old man across the room, Marcus, whose name she had never known, who had worked here for 19 years and wiped down tables with the steady patience of someone who understood that the thing about repetition is that it is always there when everything else fails. She picked up the folded apron. She held it for a moment. Then she stood up. "Wait," she said it to the room, which was the only thing she could say it to, because he was already gone. She looked at Richard Holt, who had appeared in the doorway with the expression of a man who has no remaining protocol for this situation. She said, "I owe him an apology." She paused. "And I owe several of you one as well." She looked at the judge, at Philip, and at Bridget Calloway, and at Helen by the window, and at Marcus across the room. "What I said to him was unacceptable. It was beneath this room and beneath any standard I should be holding myself to. I said it because I was angry about something that had nothing to do with him. And I made him the target because he was there, and I believed the arrangement of this room." She gestured, a small, precise gesture, at the walnut paneling and the ivory curtains and the handmade saucers, meant that he would simply absorb it. "That was a belief I should have examined a very long time ago." The room did not applaud. It did not need to. Marcus looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded. It was a single, measured nod, the kind that means, "I've heard you. We'll see." She sat back down. She looked at the apron in her hands. She held it carefully, the way you hold something that has been given to you to understand. He was on the southbound Red Line, 11 minutes from home, when his phone rang. He did not recognize the number. He almost let it go to voicemail, then answered it because Sophie had taught him that sometimes important things called from numbers you didn't know. "Mr. Brooks," a woman's voice. "I'm calling because I owe you an apology, and I don't believe in leaving debts outstanding." He held the phone. The train moved through the dark tunnel. Across from him, a man in a paint-spattered jacket was asleep, his head tilted back. "I said something to you this morning that was cruel and untrue and motivated by anger that had nothing to do with you. I said it because I thought I could. And that is not an excuse, it's an indictment of something in me that I've let go, unexamined, for too long." She paused. "I'm sorry." That's a complete sentence, not a preamble to anything. Daniel sat with this for a moment. The train rocked gently. Outside the window, the darkness of the tunnel gave way to the elevated tracks and the gray November sky above Chinatown. "Thank you," he said. A pause on her end. "I've spoken with Richard Holt. Your position is secure, my word on that. But I wanted you to know that I understand if you choose not to return." He thought about that word. Choose. "Miss Pierce," he said, "I appreciate the apology. It takes something to make it, and I'll think about what comes next. But I want to be clear. If I go back to the Aurora, it's because I've decided it's the right place for me to be, not because the arrangement has been re-established." A silence that was not uncomfortable. "That's fair," she said. "More than fair. Can I ask you something?" "Yes." "What made you call?" She was quiet for long enough that he thought she might not answer. Then she said, "An old memory. And a folded apron." He almost smiled. "Okay," he said. "Okay," she said. He hung up. The train came to a stop. He got off. Sophie was at school for another 2 hours. He had time to walk the 3 blocks home, make coffee, sit at the kitchen table, and think about things clearly in the way you can only think about them when they're over. He sat at the table. He made the coffee. He took his phone from his pocket and opened Sophie's message. The red star, the spelled test, the question. He typed back, "I'm so proud of you. I'm proud of you every single day. Today, Daddy learned something too." He hit send. He set the phone on the table. Outside, the November sky over Pilsen was the flat gray of November in Chicago. Not beautiful, not dramatic, just steady. The kind of sky that knew what the season required of it and showed up and did it without needing anyone to notice. He thought about Claire and her Sunday mornings and the kitchen window. He thought about his mother, who had raised him to take his commitments seriously and his pride even more seriously, and who had said once in the specific, offhand way she delivered the things she believed most deeply, that the trouble with dignity is that you only know what it costs when someone asks you to give it up. He thought about the apron, the way he had folded it. He had not planned to fold it that way. It was simply what his hands did, because that was how he always left things. He went back to the Aurora Lounge. Not that day. Not out of urgency or resolution. He went back 3 days later, after the thinking was done and the decision was clear and simple. Richard met him at the service entrance with the expression of a man who had spent 3 days being genuinely uncertain and was relieved, in a complicated way, to have the uncertainty resolved. "Glad you're here," Richard said. "I know," Daniel said. "I'll hang my apron." He walked through the kitchen and into the dining room. It was a Thursday. The Aurora Lounge looked exactly as it always looked. The coffered ceilings, the dark walnut, the ivory linen, the morning light in steady strips across the floor. Marcus was setting up the credenza. He looked up when Daniel came in, and something passed between them. Not words, not a gesture, just the specific recognition between two people who understand what the work requires and have decided it's worth showing up for. Daniel hung his apron on his hook. He touched the edge of his phone, not the screen, just the glass near it. The way you touch a window to feel what's on the other side. Sophie would be in 3rd grade math right now, calculating profit margins for an imaginary bakery. She would come home in 6 hours and show him her notebook and eat 2 crackers while he heated soup and tell him 17 things that had happened since morning. In no particular order, with the confidence of someone who assumed everything she noticed was worth noticing. He put the phone in his pocket. He picked up his tray. He went to work.